A person does not learn how to fight among strangers first. The real battle begins among one's own people, where the faces are familiar and the wounds are deeper because they come from hands that once offered comfort. According to the quiet psychological truth that Carl Jung often circled around, conflict with one's own people is never merely external. It is a mirror held too close to the face, reflecting parts of the self that have been denied, rejected, or pushed into the shadow. To fight with your own people, then, is not to destroy them, but to survive the shock of recognition. The pain arises not because they are enemies, but because they carry fragments of your own unconscious life. In early life, a person absorbs the values, fears, and moral rules of their family and society without question. These ideas sink into the psyche like sediment, forming what Jung called the collective and personal unconscious. At first, belonging feels safe. Agreement feels like love. Obedience feels like peace. But growth does not remain obedient forever. The moment a person begins to individuate, to separate psychologically from the group, the first friction appears. The group senses the change before words are spoken. A slight difference in thought, a refusal to conform, a new way of seeing reality, and suddenly the warmth of belonging cools into suspicion. This is where the inner war begins. The tragedy is that most people believe conflict with their own people means betrayal. They believe disagreement equals disloyalty. Jung would argue the opposite. Refusing to confront your own people honestly is a betrayal of the self. When the individual suppresses their truth to maintain harmony, that truth does not disappear. It sinks into the shadow, where it turns bitter, resentful, and eventually destructive. Thus, the unspoken conflict becomes more dangerous than open disagreement. Learning to fight with your own people requires first understanding projection. Jung taught that we unconsciously project our denied traits onto others. The qualities you most despise in your family or community are often qualities you have not yet integrated within yourself. When you call them controlling, you may be denying your own need for authority. When you call them weak, you may be afraid of your own vulnerability. This does not mean the conflict is imaginary. It means the battlefield exists both inside and outside at once. To fight wisely, one must fight on both fronts. At first, the individual reacts emotionally. Anger flares. Old wounds reopen. Childhood grievances resurface with surprising intensity. Jung would say this regression is inevitable because conflict with one's own people activates archetypal patterns buried deep in the psyche. The tyrannical father, the devouring mother, the rejected child, the exile. These figures are not just personal memories. They are universal psychological forces. When a person argues with their family or community, they are often unconsciously reliving ancient dramas of dominance, submission, and rebellion. The mistake many people make is trying to win these battles through aggression alone. They shout, accuse, withdraw, or attempt to humiliate the other side. But aggression without consciousness only strengthens the collective shadow. The group closes ranks. The individual is labeled difficult, arrogant, or dangerous. The conflict escalates, not because the individual is wrong, but because the method lacks psychological depth. Jung believed true confrontation must be conscious, symbolic, and grounded in self-knowledge. To learn how to fight with your own people, one must first stop seeing oneself as purely innocent. This is the most painful step. It requires admitting that you, too, benefit from the system you criticize. You, too, carry prejudice, fear, and the desire for dominance. When the individual integrates this realization, their tone changes. The fight becomes less about proving superiority and more about insisting on truth. This shift alone alters the psychological field of the conflict. The next stage is learning to tolerate isolation. Jung emphasized that individuation often leads to loneliness. When you no longer fully belong to the old group, but have not yet found a new psychological home, you stand alone. Many people retreat at this stage. They apologize for truths they should have defended. They shrink themselves to regain acceptance. Jung would see this as a failure of courage. The psyche demands growth, even if the price is temporary exile. Those who cannot endure this solitude remain trapped in collective thinking for life. Fighting with your own people also requires learning symbolic language. Direct confrontation often fails because people defend their conscious beliefs ferociously. But symbols bypass resistance. Stories, metaphors, and lived examples speak more deeply than arguments. Jung knew that transformation rarely occurs through logic alone. When you live differently, when your actions reflect inner integration, the group begins to feel the disturbance without being able to name it. This is a quieter, more dangerous kind of confrontation because it challenges identity rather than opinion. As the conflict continues, the individual encounters guilt. This guilt is not always moral. Often it is archetypal. It comes from breaking an ancient psychological contract, the agreement to remain what the group expects. Jung warned that unresolved guilt can turn inward, manifesting as depression or self-sabotage. The antidote is responsibility. Not responsibility for others' feelings, but responsibility for one's own psyche. When you accept that your path will hurt others and still choose it with integrity, the guilt loses its power to poison. Eventually, if the individual persists, something unexpected happens. The fight changes form. The group may never fully accept the individual's transformation, but certain members begin to respond differently. They may not agree, but they respect the consistency. Jung believed this is how cultural evolution occurs, not through mass rebellion, but through individuals who embody a new psychological attitude. These individuals absorb the hostility of the group without becoming hostile themselves. In doing so, they metabolize the collective shadow. The final stage of learning to fight with your own people is forgiveness, not sentimental forgiveness, but psychological clarity. You realize that your people could only act from their level of consciousness. Their limitations were not personal attacks, but expressions of unexamined archetypes. This realization does not excuse harm, but it frees you from carrying it. Jung would say that at this stage, the enemy dissolves. What remains is difference without hatred. The paradox is that by learning how to fight properly, you no longer need to fight endlessly. The conflict either transforms into dialogue or loses its emotional charge altogether. The individual becomes internally sovereign. They no longer need approval, nor do they seek domination. They stand rooted in their own psyche, capable of love without submission and resistance without cruelty. And this is the quiet conclusion Jung's psychology leads toward. The real battle with one's own people is not about victory, but about integration. When the individual integrates their shadow, their projections withdraw. When projections withdraw, conflict loses its intoxicating power. What remains is a person who can stand among their own people without lying to themselves and without needing to destroy the tribe that shaped them. This is not peace in the sentimental sense. It is psychological maturity, the ability to endure tension without collapsing into hatred or conformity. And this is the biggest lesson of today, which should always be remembered in life. If you like the video, then please like and share it. Thanks for watching.